If people can't feel your words, they'll never follow your voice. That one truth changes everything about communication. Most people speak just to be heard. Leaders speak to be remembered. It's not about how loud you are. It's about the power behind every word. Precision, clarity, timing, presence. Because if your voice isn't respected, your ideas will fade. And if your words don't carry weight, your presence won't lead anyone. This isn't just another audiobook. It's a transformation, a guide to building a voice that commands attention without ever needing to shout. A voice that inspires action without pretending to impress. A voice that moves both hearts and decisions. You don't need bigger words, you need stronger ones. You don't need to talk more, you need to talk better. In each chapter, you'll learn how to speak like someone worth listening to, with real, practical, and instantly usable tools for every situation, from daily conversations to the moments that define your leadership. This is for the ones ready to lead, not someday, but now. Because if your words don't lead, nothing else will. And your journey starts right here. Chapter 1. Before you speak, become. There's a moment that exists before every powerful conversation, before every life-changing presentation, before every word that shifts the atmosphere in a room. It's not the moment you open your mouth. It's the moment you decide who you're going to be when you do. Most people believe communication starts with words. They rehearse lines, memorize scripts, practice pronunciations. They focus on what they'll say, how they'll say it, the perfect phrasing that will make them sound intelligent or charming or authoritative. But here's what they miss. The most persuasive communicators in the world understand that power doesn't begin with speech, it begins with identity. Think about the last time you walked into a room and instantly felt someone's presence before they said a single word. Maybe it was a leader at work, a charismatic stranger at a gathering, or even someone you admired from a distance. What you felt wasn't their vocabulary, it wasn't their voice. It was the energy of someone who had already decided who they were. And that decision radiated outward like heat from a flame. This is the invisible foundation of all magnetic communication. Before you can speak with authority, you must become authoritative. Before you can inspire trust, you must embody trustworthiness. Before you can move people with your words, you must first move yourself into alignment with the version of you that deserves to be heard. Consider two people delivering the exact same message. One stumbles through it, apologizing with their body language, shrinking with every sentence, hoping desperately that people will agree. The other stands rooted, unhurried, speaking as if their words are simply facts waiting to be acknowledged. Same words, completely different worlds. The difference isn't in the script. It's in the identity they claimed before opening their mouths. Your presence is a broadcast, and people are receiving the signal long before you form your first sentence. They're reading the confidence in your posture, the certainty in your gaze, the stillness or chaos in your energy. They're asking themselves a question they don't even know they're asking. Does this person believe what they're about to say? And if you haven't answered that question for yourself first, they'll sense the hesitation like blood and water. Becoming before speaking means making a conscious choice about the energy you carry into every interaction. It means standing in front of the mirror, not to practice words, but to practice being. It means breathing into the person you want to be perceived as until that perception becomes your reality. It's not fake, it's intentional. It's the difference between hoping people listen and knowing they will. The world doesn't respond to who you wish you were. It responds to who you are in the moment you show up. And here's the truth that changes everything.
You get to decide that every single time. You get to choose confidence over doubt, clarity over confusion, calm over chaos. That choice, made internally and silently, becomes the foundation upon which every powerful word you speak will stand. So before you worry about what to say, ask yourself a better question. Who do I need to become to say it? When you answer that, when you step fully into that version of yourself, the words will follow, and they'll carry a weight that no script could ever give them. Chapter 2. Confidence is contagious. Walk into any room where decisions are being made, and you'll notice something remarkable. The person everyone gravitates toward isn't necessarily the smartest or the loudest. It's the one who seems certain. Certain of their value, certain of their perspective, certain that they belong exactly where they are. And without saying a word about it, that certainty spreads through the room like wildfire. Confidence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It operates on a frequency that human beings are hardwired to detect and respond to. When you speak with genuine self-assurance, something fascinating happens in the minds of those listening. Their skepticism softens, their resistance lowers. They begin to mirror the energy you're projecting, almost as if they can't help themselves, because confidence, at its core, is contagious. Think about the last time someone pitched you an idea with absolute conviction. Maybe they were suggesting a restaurant, recommending a career move, or selling you on a vision. If they believed it completely, chances are you felt that belief transfer into your own mind. You started seeing possibilities you hadn't considered. You leaned in. You wanted to follow them, even if just for a moment, into the world they were describing. That's the invisible transfer of certainty from one mind to another. Now, contrast that with someone who apologizes for their ideas before fully expressing them. Someone who uses phrases like, "this might be stupid, but," or "I'm not sure if this makes sense." Even if their idea is brilliant, you feel their doubt before you feel their vision. And doubt, just like confidence, is contagious. It spreads. It makes others question what they're hearing, not because the idea is flawed, but because the energy behind it is fractured. Here's what most people misunderstand about confidence. They think it's about being right. It's not. It's about being committed. Committed to your perspective, committed to the value you bring, committed to showing up fully even when outcomes are uncertain. When you speak from that place of commitment, people don't just hear your words, they feel your resolve, and that feeling is magnetic. Consider a doctor delivering a diagnosis. Two doctors could present identical information, but the one who speaks with calm assurance creates an entirely different emotional experience. Patients trust them more. They follow treatment plans more consistently. They heal better. Why? Because the confidence in the doctor's voice becomes the patient's confidence in the process. The certainty transfers, and suddenly the path forward feels possible. This principle applies everywhere. In boardrooms, where ideas rise and fall based on how unshakably they're presented. In relationships, where vulnerability paired with self-assurance builds deeper connection than either could alone. In moments of crisis, where one steady voice can anchor an entire group spiraling toward panic. But here's the critical part. False confidence collapses under pressure. People can sense the difference between someone who has convinced themselves they're confident and someone who genuinely trusts their own value. The first is performance. The second is presence. And presence always wins because it doesn't require maintenance. It simply is. Building genuine confidence isn't about eliminating doubt. It's about choosing commitment over hesitation in the moments that matter. It's about speaking as though your words have weight because you've given them weight internally. It's about trusting that your perspective, flawed and human as it may be, still deserves space in the conversation. When you carry yourself this way, something shifts in every interaction. People listen differently. They engage more deeply. They remember what you said long after the conversation ends. Not because you were louder or more aggressive, but because your certainty gave them permission to be certain too. You became the spark. And confidence, once ignited, spreads. Chapter 4. Tone, Timing, and Tension. Imagine a violinist preparing to perform. The notes on the page are identical for every musician who plays that piece, but in the hands of a master, those notes transform into something that makes audiences weep. The difference isn't the notes, it's the space between them, the pressure on the strings, the exact moment the bow changes direction. It's tone, timing, and tension. Communication works the same way. You can say the exact right words in the exact right order and still fail completely if you misjudge the delivery. Because meaning doesn't live in words alone. It lives in how those words are shaped by your voice, when they're released into the conversation, and what emotional texture they carry. Tone is the color of your communication. It tells people how to feel about what you're saying before their conscious mind even processes the content. A sentence delivered with warmth invites connection. The same sentence delivered with ice creates distance. You can say, "That's interesting," and communicate genuine curiosity or thinly veiled contempt. The words are identical. The worlds they create are universes apart. Most people don't realize how much their tone betrays their true feelings. They say, "I'm fine," with a voice that screams frustration. They offer compliments wrapped in condescension. They deliver feedback with an edge of resentment that undermines every constructive word. The problem isn't dishonesty, it's unconsciousness. They haven't learned to align their tone with their intention, and the mismatch creates confusion and mistrust. Mastering tone means becoming deliberately aware of the emotional frequency you're broadcasting. Before important conversations, the most effective communicators calibrate. They ask themselves, what emotion do I want this person to feel? Not what information do I want them to receive, but what do I want them to feel? Then they shape their voice accordingly. Steadiness for reassurance, warmth for connection, firmness for boundaries. Each tone is a tool, and choosing the right one makes all the difference. Then there's timing, the pause that lets a powerful statement breathe, the moment of silence after asking a meaningful question, the perfectly placed hesitation that creates anticipation. Timing is the rhythm of influence, and those who master it understand that rushing through words destroys their impact. Think about the people who dominate conversations by speaking constantly, filling every gap with noise. They believe they're being heard because they're being loud. But volume without timing is just chaos. Now think about someone who speaks half as much but commands twice the attention. They understand that strategic silence creates gravity. They let their words land before adding more. They give listeners time to absorb, to think, to feel the weight of what was just said. Tension is the element that transforms ordinary communication into something unforgettable. It's the acknowledgement of what's not spoken, the willingness to address the difficult thing everyone else is avoiding, the courage to let conflict exist without immediately resolving it. Tension makes people lean in because human beings are wired to seek resolution. When you introduce it deliberately and navigate it skillfully, you become impossible to ignore. But tension without control becomes chaos. The goal isn't to create discomfort for its own sake. It's to harness the natural tension that exists in meaningful conversations and use it to drive toward truth. It's saying, we need to talk about what's not being said here and watching the room shift. It's acknowledging disagreement instead of glossing over it. It's letting silence do the heavy lifting when words would weaken the moment. When you combine all three, tone that matches intention, timing that creates impact, and tension that demands engagement, you transcend basic communication. You become someone whose words don't just inform, they move, they shift energy, they create moments people remember long after the conversation ends. Because you're not just speaking, you're conducting, and every conversation becomes a performance worth experiencing.
Chapter 5. Speak less, mean more. In a world obsessed with constant noise, the rarest form of power is knowing when to stop talking. Not because you've run out of things to say, but because you've said everything that matters. This is the discipline that separates influential communicators from forgettable ones, the ability to deliver maximum impact with minimum words. There's a reason ancient wisdom traditions revered silence and brevity. They understood something modern culture has forgotten. Scarcity creates value. When your words are rare, they become precious. When you speak constantly, you train people to stop listening. Your voice becomes background noise, easily ignored, quickly forgotten. But when you speak only when you have something worth saying, people don't just listen, they wait for it. Watch how exhausting people communicate. They explain the same point 5 different ways, as if repetition equals clarity. They fill pauses with rambling stories that go nowhere. They answer questions that weren't asked and solve problems that don't exist. They mistake quantity for quality, believing that more words somehow equal more value. What they don't realize is that every unnecessary word dilutes the power of the necessary ones. Now observe someone who has mastered economy of language. They answer questions directly. They make their point and stop. They trust that their message, delivered cleanly, will land without requiring scaffolding. There's a confidence in that restraint, a trust in their own clarity that makes every sentence feel deliberate, chosen, essential. This isn't about being cold or withholding. It's about respecting both your message and your audience enough to deliver it without decoration. Think about the most memorable quotes in history. They're rarely long. I have a dream. Ask not what your country can do for you. Be the change you wish to see in the world. These aren't paragraphs. They're precision strikes. They said everything that needed saying and nothing more. The practice of speaking less requires brutal self-editing. Before you open your mouth, ask yourself, is this necessary? Does this add value, or am I just filling silence? Am I saying this because it needs to be said, or because I need to be heard? That last question is the most important. Much of what passes for communication is actually just people proving they exist, demanding attention, seeking validation, and the audience always knows the difference. When you commit to meaning more with less, you develop something rare, the ability to distill complexity into simplicity. You start recognizing the single sentence that captures what others need 10 minutes to explain. You learn to trust that one powerful question often accomplishes more than a lengthy speech. You discover that saying no clearly is more respectful than a paragraph of excuses. This discipline also creates space for others. When you're not monopolizing conversations with endless talking, other voices emerge, better ideas surface, collaboration becomes possible. You shift from being someone who dominates discussions to someone who elevates them. And paradoxically, by speaking less, you become more influential. People start valuing your input specifically because it's not constant. There's also profound power in the pause, the moment after you've made your point, when you resist the urge to keep explaining. That silence creates tension, and tension creates engagement. It forces listeners to sit with what you've said, to process it, to feel its weight. But most people panic in those moments. They rush to fill the gap, accidentally undermining the very point they just made. Learning to speak less isn't about self-suppression, it's about self-mastery. It's choosing impact over volume. It's understanding that your value as a communicator isn't measured by how much you talk, but by how much your words matter when you do. It's the confidence to let a single sentence stand alone, knowing it's enough. Because when you truly mean something, when every word carries intention and purpose, less isn't just more, it's everything. Chapter 6. Command the room without raising your voice. There's a particular kind of presence that stops conversations mid-sentence. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It doesn't need to. It simply exists with such grounded certainty that everything else falls quiet around it. This is the power that comes not from volume, but from mastery of self. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. They're often the most insecure, using volume to compensate for lack of substance. True authority whispers. It speaks at a level that makes people lean in rather than lean back. Because when you're genuinely confident in what you're saying, you don't need to overwhelm anyone into agreeing with you. Think about the meetings you've attended where someone dominated through sheer vocal force. They talked over others, raised their voice to make points, used volume as a weapon. What happened afterward? People complained, eyes rolled. Decisions made in that energy often got quietly reversed later, because compliance gained through intimidation isn't real influence. It's borrowed time until the pressure lifts and people do what they actually wanted all along. Now, recall a moment when someone commanded attention without effort. Maybe they entered a chaotic discussion and said something quietly, and suddenly everyone stopped to listen. Maybe they disagreed with a proposal, and their calm, "I see it differently" carried more weight than someone else's heated argument. That's the gravitational pull of grounded authority. It doesn't push, it attracts. Commanding a room without raising your voice requires something most people don't develop: complete control of your internal state. Because your voice is just the external expression of your internal world. When you're anxious, your voice betrays it with speed and pitch. When you're defensive, it sharpens and rises. When you're uncertain, it weakens and trails off. But when you're genuinely centered, when you've rooted yourself in calm certainty, your voice naturally becomes something people want to hear. This is why the most powerful communicators practice stillness before speaking. They breathe. They ground themselves. They clear the static from their internal channel so that what emerges is clean signal, not noise. They speak from the center of their being rather than the surface of their anxiety. And that difference is audible, palpable, undeniable. There's also strategic brilliance in choosing low volume. When you speak quietly, you force people to focus. They can't half listen. They have to actively engage or miss what you're saying. This creates a dynamic where your words become more valuable simply because accessing them requires effort. You've turned attention into a choice they make, not a demand you place. Lowering your voice in moments of tension is particularly powerful. When conflict escalates and voices rise, the person who deliberately softens their tone becomes the anchor. They demonstrate control when others are losing it. They model the energy they want the room to return to. And often, without anyone explicitly acknowledging it, the entire conversation descends to match their register. But this only works when it's genuine. If you're seething with anger and forcing your voice to stay calm, people will feel the disconnect. Your body language will leak the truth. Your eyes will betray the rage your mouth is trying to hide. Authentic quiet power comes from actually being powerful, not from performing it. This means doing the internal work, processing your emotions before entering high-stakes conversations, resolving your need for validation so you're not using meetings to prove yourself, building genuine confidence so you don't need volume as a crutch. When you handle your inner world, your outer communication becomes effortless. Here's what changes when you master this. People start describing you as commanding presence without knowing why. They can't point to anything specific you do, but they always remember you were in the room. Your opinions carry disproportionate weight. Your questions redirect entire discussions. Your silence speaks volumes. You become living proof that the quietest voice can be the most impossible to ignore.
Chapter 7. The Art of Persuasion Without Pressure. The best salespeople don't feel like salespeople. The most influential leaders don't feel like they're manipulating. The communicators who change minds don't feel like they're forcing anything. There's an art to persuasion that operates invisibly, guiding people toward conclusions they reach on their own, believing the decision was theirs all along. Pressure creates resistance. It's a fundamental law of human psychology. The moment someone feels pushed, their defenses activate. They dig into their current position, not because it's necessarily right, but because being wrong would mean surrendering to force. And nobody wants to be forced, so they resist, even when the idea being pushed might actually benefit them. Persuasion without pressure understands this. It works with human nature instead of against it. It creates space for people to move rather than cornering them. It plants seeds and allows time for growth rather than demanding immediate harvest. This approach takes more patience, but it creates lasting change instead of temporary compliance. The foundation is asking instead of telling. Questions are invitations. They engage curiosity rather than triggering defense. When you ask, "What concerns you most about this approach?" you're opening a door. When you declare, "This approach is clearly better," you're building a wall. Same goal, opposite effect. One creates dialogue, the other creates debate. Great questions do something magical. They make people think. And when people think through something themselves, they develop ownership over the conclusion. If you can guide someone through a series of questions that lead them to discover your perspective on their own, they'll defend that perspective more fiercely than if you'd handed it to them directly. This is why the most persuasive communicators are exceptional listeners. They're not waiting for their turn to talk, they're gathering intelligence. What does this person value? What fears are driving their resistance? What language resonates with them? Every answer provides material to build a bridge from where they are to where you'd like them to be. There's also profound power in acknowledging the validity of opposing viewpoints. When you say, "I understand why you see it that way, and there's truth in that perspective," something unexpected happens. The other person relaxes. They feel heard, which means they no longer need to defend themselves. And in that relaxation, they become open to considering alternatives. Contrast this with the typical persuasion approach, attacking the other position, listing its flaws, demonstrating why they're wrong. Even when the logic is sound, this creates an adversarial dynamic. You've made it personal. Now they're defending not an idea anymore. They're defending their identity, their intelligence, their right to hold opinions. And that's a battle you can't win with logic. Persuasion without pressure also means being comfortable with people saying no. When you give someone genuine permission to disagree, to walk away, to choose differently, you remove the invisible weight of obligation. And paradoxically, that freedom often leads them to say yes, because now it's a choice, not a manipulation, and people crave agency over their decisions. The timing element matters enormously. Some minds need to be planted with an idea and given time to integrate it. Pushing for immediate agreement forces a premature decision based on incomplete processing. But if you introduce a concept, support it with light evidence, then create space for reflection, you allow their mind to do the work you can't do for them. This doesn't mean being passive or indirect. You can be crystal clear about what you believe while remaining non-coercive about what others should believe. You can present your case with conviction while respecting someone's autonomy to reject it. The strength is in the confidence that your idea can stand on its own merit without needing force to prop it up. Here's what shifts when you embrace this approach. Conversations stop feeling like competitions. Influence stops requiring exhaustion. People start coming back to your ideas days or weeks later, saying, "I've been thinking about what you said." You become someone who changes minds not through dominance, but through resonance. And that kind of persuasion doesn't just win arguments, it builds lasting alignment.
Chapter 8. Crisis Communication. Power in the Storm. When everything is falling apart, when panic is spreading like wildfire, when uncertainty threatens to paralyze everyone around you, the way you communicate doesn't just matter. It becomes the difference between chaos and navigation, between collapse and resilience. Crisis doesn't reveal character, it reveals preparation. In moments of high stress, human beings revert to instinct. They look for certainty when everything feels uncertain. They search for strength when they feel weak. They need someone to demonstrate that it's possible to remain grounded when the ground is shaking. Your words in these moments carry exponential weight because they're not just conveying information, they're providing an emotional lifeline. The first rule of crisis communication is ruthless clarity. This is not the time for corporate speak, diplomatic hedging, or softening reality. People can handle hard truths. What they can't handle is ambiguity when they desperately need understanding. Say what's happening. Say what it means. Say what's being done about it. Strip away everything else. But clarity alone isn't enough. Your delivery determines whether people trust the message. If your voice betrays panic, if your body language screams fear, if your words say, "we're fine," while your energy says, "we're doomed," people will believe the energy, always. Because in crisis, humans become exquisitely attuned to authenticity. Their survival instincts amplify their ability to detect lies. This is why the most effective crisis communicators practice what seems counterintuitive. They slow down. While everyone else accelerates into panic, they deliberately reduce their pace. They speak more slowly. They breathe more deeply. They create a pocket of calm in the center of the storm. And that calm becomes contagious, gradually spreading outward to those listening. There's also strategic power in acknowledging emotion without being consumed by it. Saying, "I know this is frightening, and that's a completely normal response," validates what people are feeling without amplifying it. You're demonstrating that fear can exist without dictating action. You're modeling emotional intelligence, showing that feeling something doesn't mean surrendering to it. The structure of crisis communication matters enormously. People in panic need sequence. First, state the reality without exaggeration or minimization. Second, identify what's in your control versus what isn't. Third, outline immediate next steps. This structure creates cognitive order when people's minds are spiraling into chaos. It gives them something to hold on to, a map through confusion. Avoid the temptation to overpromise. In crisis, trust is more valuable than optimism. If you say everything will be fine, and it's not,
you've destroyed your credibility permanently. But if you say, "This is serious, here's what we know, here's what we're doing, and I'll keep you updated as we learn more," you've established yourself as a reliable source of truth. And in ongoing crisis, that reliability becomes invaluable. There's also the critical element of action orientation. People in crisis feel powerless. Giving them something to do, even something small, returns a sense of agency. "Here's how you can help," or "here's what you should do next," transforms them from passive victims into active participants. And that shift from helplessness to engagement can be psychologically life-saving. Know when to address the group and when to go individual. Mass communication handles information distribution, but true leadership in crisis often happens in one-on-one moments. Checking on the person who seems to be unraveling, offering specific support to those hit hardest. These individual touchpoints build loyalty and trust that outlast the crisis itself. Silence in crisis is toxic. Even when you don't have new information, checking in matters. "No updates yet, but I wanted you to know I'm still here and working on this," maintains connection. Radio silence allows fear to fill the vacuum with worst-case scenarios. Your presence, even without answers, provides stabilization. When you master crisis communication, something remarkable happens. People remember how you made them feel when everything was falling apart. They remember your steadiness, your honesty, your refusal to abandon them to chaos. And long after the crisis ends, they'll follow you into the next challenge because they've seen who you become under pressure. That's not just communication, that's leadership forged in fire.
Chapter 9. The Emotional Intelligence of Speech. Words without emotional awareness are just noise. You can be technically correct, perfectly articulate, and logically sound, yet completely miss the human being standing in front of you. Because communication isn't just an exchange of information, it's an exchange of energy, feeling, and unspoken understanding. And those who master this invisible dimension become unforgettable. Emotional intelligence in speech begins with a skill most people never develop: reading the room before you enter it. This means paying attention to what's not being said, the tension in someone's shoulders, the forced smile that doesn't reach their eyes, the silence that feels heavy versus the silence that feels peaceful. You're scanning for emotional weather, and your words need to match the climate. Imagine walking into a meeting where someone just received devastating news. You don't know this. You launch into your prepared presentation with enthusiasm and energy. The content might be brilliant, but the mismatch between your tone and the room's emotional state creates dissonance. You failed to attune. And in that failure, your message loses all power, no matter how important it might be. The emotionally intelligent communicator would sense something off within seconds. They'd adjust, maybe pause and ask, "Is this still a good time?" or "What's going on?" or simply soften their energy to match what they're feeling. This flexibility, this willingness to abandon your script in service of connection, separates those who communicate effectively from those who just talk at people. There's also the crucial skill of naming emotion without judgment. When someone is clearly upset and you pretend not to notice, you create distance. When you acknowledge it with something like, "You seem frustrated, and I want to understand why," you build a bridge. You've given permission for the real conversation to happen beneath the surface conversation. And that's where transformation lives. But naming emotion requires you to be comfortable with your own emotional landscape first. If you're terrified of anger, you'll tiptoe around someone else's anger instead of addressing it directly. If you're uncomfortable with sadness, you'll try to fix people's pain instead of simply witnessing it. Your unresolved emotional material becomes a barrier to truly connecting with others. Empathy in communication doesn't mean agreeing with everyone. It means understanding their perspective deeply enough to communicate in ways they can actually receive. If someone values logic, lead with data. If someone needs emotional validation before they can think clearly, provide that first. You're not changing your message, you're changing your delivery to match their receptive capacity. Watch how the most influential people handle disagreement. They don't just counter arguments, they acknowledge the emotional reality driving those arguments. I hear that you're worried about your team's workload, and that's a legitimate concern. Does something powerful. It separates the person from the position, validating them while preparing to address the issue. There's particular genius in the strategic pause when emotions run high. Someone says something inflammatory. The amateur responds immediately, often escalating. The emotionally intelligent communicator takes a breath, lets the words land, creates space between stimulus and response. In that space, they choose their next move deliberately rather than reactively. And that choice changes everything. Tone matching is another subtle but powerful tool. When someone is speaking quietly and you respond with loud enthusiasm, the energy mismatch feels jarring. When someone is processing something heavy and you immediately jump to solutions, you've missed the moment. The art is in meeting people where they are energetically, then gradually guiding toward where you'd like the conversation to go. This doesn't mean manipulation. It means respect. Respect for the fact that everyone is carrying invisible weights, fighting battles you know nothing about, operating from wounds they've never shared. When you speak with that awareness, your words naturally soften around the edges. They become more careful, more considered, more likely to land as intended rather than triggering unintended reactions. The ultimate expression of emotional intelligence in speech is knowing when words aren't the answer. Sometimes presence matters more than advice. Sometimes a listening silence heals more than a brilliant solution. Sometimes, "I don't know what to say, but I'm here," is the most powerful sentence you can offer. When you develop this dimension of communication, you stop being someone who just exchanges information. You become someone people feel safe with, someone who sees them, someone whose words carry weight because they're wrapped in genuine care for how those words will be received. And that kind of communicator doesn't just influence outcomes, they influence lives.
Chapter 10. Words that outlive you. Some conversations fade the moment they end. Others echo for decades. The difference isn't luck. It's the understanding that certain words, spoken in certain ways, transcend the moment and become part of someone's internal architecture. These are the words that outlive you. Think about the statements that have shaped your life. Maybe a teacher once said something that redirected your entire path. Maybe a mentor's single sentence gave you permission to become who you were meant to be. Maybe someone spoke truth into your life at exactly the moment you needed to hear it, and you've carried those words ever since. That's the power available to every person willing to speak with intention. Creating lasting impact through communication requires a shift in how you view your words. They're not just tools for the immediate transaction, they're seeds. Some will sprout immediately, others will lie dormant for years before the right conditions allow them to bloom. But once planted in someone's consciousness, they become possibilities waiting to unfold. The words that outlive you share certain qualities. They're true, not just factually, but emotionally. They resonate at a frequency that bypasses intellectual analysis and hits something deeper. They feel like recognition, like someone finally articulated what you always knew but couldn't express. This is why clichés rarely stick. They're true in general, but meaningless in particular. Lasting words feel custom-made, even when they're simple. There's also the element of timing.
The same words delivered at the wrong moment float past without impact, but delivered when someone is ready, when they're open, when they're desperate for exactly that perspective, those words become tattoos on the soul. This is why the most influential communicators develop sensitivity to readiness. They recognize the moment when someone is standing at a crossroads, consciously or unconsciously seeking guidance. Legacy communication often involves giving people permission they didn't know they needed. Permission to be ambitious, permission to rest, permission to say no, permission to disappoint others in service of honoring themselves. These permissions feel revolutionary because they contradict the limiting narratives people have internalized. When you speak these permissions with authority and conviction, you don't just change someone's day, you change their trajectory. Consider the difference between "good job" and "I saw how you handled that impossible situation with grace, and it reminded me why I believe in you." One is generic praise, the other is specific recognition that becomes a reference point for someone's capability. Years later, in moments of self-doubt, they'll hear your voice reminding them of their strength. The words that endure also carry a quality of unconditional positive regard. Not blind positivity that ignores reality, but the kind of seeing that acknowledges someone's full humanity, including their flaws, and chooses to believe in their potential anyway. When you speak to the person someone is becoming, rather than just who they are today, you activate possibility. This is why investing in meaningful conversations matters far more than accumulating surface interactions. 100 forgettable exchanges can't compete with one conversation that reaches someone's core. Quality of communication will always matter more than quantity. The person who touches 10 lives deeply creates more impact than someone who entertains 10,000 briefly. There's responsibility here too. Words that outlive you don't just carry your message, they carry your values, your worldview, your essence. They become part of your legacy, the invisible mark you leave on the world. This doesn't mean being perfect. It means being intentional. It means asking yourself before important conversations, what do I want this person to remember in 10 years? The practice of speaking words that last requires you to slow down, to be fully present rather than already thinking about your next sentence, to actually see the human being receiving your message and consider what they most need to hear. It's the opposite of transactional communication. It's sacred communication, though it doesn't need to feel formal or heavy. Sometimes the words that change lives are delivered casually, almost offhandedly, but always authentically. Here's what becomes possible when you embrace this responsibility. Your influence extends far beyond your physical presence. People you spoke to years ago still feel your impact. They pass your wisdom to others, often without remembering where they first heard it. Your words ripple outward through time and relationships in ways you'll never fully witness. You become part of the invisible infrastructure that shapes human lives. In the end, communication mastery isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about being the voice that people carry with them long after they've left. It's speaking in ways that plant forests instead of plucking flowers. It's understanding that every conversation is an opportunity to leave someone different than you found them. And when you approach communication with that level of care, your words don't just communicate, they create, they transform, they outlive you.